Now, as we draw ever closer to the release of The Rise of Skywalker, I figured I'd make a series of videos delving into some of these characters. And I thought there was no better place to start than with Rey, easily the most controversial character in this trilogy, if not in all of Star Wars. And I think a good place to start the discussion is to look at a quote taken by Chris Terrio from a recent issue of Empire magazine. And he, if you don't know, co-wrote Episode 9 along with J.J. Abrams. Anyway, when asked about questions that The Rise of Skywalker would answer, he said, "One of them is a simple one. Who is Rey?" Which is a question that people not only wonder about quite literally, but wonder about in the spiritual sense. How can Rey become the spiritual heir to the Jedi? We kept coming back to who is Rey, and how can we give the most satisfying answer to that, not only factually, because obviously people are interested in whether there's more to be learned of Rey's story, but more importantly, who is she as a character? How will she find the courage and will and inner strength and power to carry on what she's inherited? Okay, and though I certainly do agree that who is Rey is a very, very important question, obviously, I think the better question here, not to sound like Drax from Infinity War, but the better question is, why is Rey? As in, why is Rey in this story? How does this character further it or add to what came before? And before you come at me with something like, she doesn't have to further it because the story is just about her now, even J.J. Abrams recently said that rarely does the start of a story have nothing to do with the end. So even if you want to say that the sequel trilogy is simply her story or hers and Kylo Ren's, she's still been put into what is a 9-part story overall, so it is fair to ask what is her place in the grand scheme of things. And to be honest here, one thing I believe The Force Awakens did pretty well is make it feel like Rey was discovering her place in this story, that she was or could be a natural part of it, not that she was being forced into it, sorry for the pun. The movie makes it feel like, mainly with the Force vision or flashback after touching Anakin's lightsaber, that she was being guided to Luke Skywalker, likely by the Force ghosts or Anakin himself, for a very important and specific reason, one that was likely associated with the reason why Luke Skywalker had vanished in the first place, yet had apparently left a map so he could be found by someone. And though I may have had other issues with the film and or the execution of it, the premise that Luke Skywalker had gone in search of something and was now waiting for someone, well, I was intrigued by that. Going into the next movie, I really wanted to learn more about what Luke was looking for, since he went to the first Jedi Temple of all places in the galaxy, and why Rey of all people in the galaxy was the one apparently being sent to him, or the one he was waiting for. As I talked about in a video the other day, there were a lot of people excited going into Episode 8. Another thing about Rey that I thought was great or very well done was her introduction or how she was handled in the first half of the film. I'm immediately interested in the character after we meet her and get a peek at her dreary day-to-day life on Jakku. I feel for her and the loneliness she must be enduring as she tries to scratch out a life on this desolate, virtually lawless world where it's all about just trying to survive day in and day out. I also like that she seems to be conflicted internally, that she talks about how she's waiting for someone to come back for her family, yet at the same time, we have moments where she's watching a ship leave the planet, and we can see the desire to leave, or when she looks at the old woman cleaning parts across from her, and she no doubt realizes, that'll be me in 50 years if something doesn't change. Of course, a lot of this desire, or being dead set on wanting to stay and waiting for someone, is contingent on learning that, yes, there is someone worth waiting for that is potentially coming back. And we'll get to more on that in a little bit. Anyway, my curiosity about Rey is piqued midway through the movie after the aforementioned Force Vision scene when she touches the lightsaber of Anakin Skywalker. After that, I really want to know more about her. I want to know what her place is in this story, since the film is pretty much telling me, or has just convinced me, that she has one if she's going to be shown what you could call a brief history of the Skywalker family, and that it likely somehow ties into why she was left on Jakku at some point. We even hear Obi-Wan Kenobi say, "These are your first steps," which is something once said to Luke. Again, at this point, the movie is doing a great job of making her feel like she is or will be a huge part of the story, and making me care about the character. I feel like I'm discovering things with her, that I'm going on this journey with her. This is one of the reasons why the first Star Wars movie is terrific. You feel like you're along for the ride with Luke Skywalker. And making me interested in Rey, honestly, wasn't an overly easy task, considering I, like many people I'd imagine, going into this movie were mainly looking forward to seeing the old characters again, more so than the new. Not saying I wasn't interested in the new at all, because I was, but after 35 years, I really wanted to see Luke Skywalker on the big screen again. And maybe the most impressive part of The Force Awakens is that I wasn't completely outraged that, after waiting so long, we only got to see Luke for 30 seconds at the bitter end of the movie, and he doesn't even say anything, he just gives a look. It was a testament to how well, overall, I think Rey's story had carried the movie, and how interested I was to learn some answers and to see where their story, Rey and Luke's, would end up in the next movie. The problem with all this, though, is the answering of all those questions in a satisfying way by the next movie would very much decide the fate of both movies, since this one had put so much on the next one, as well as possibly generate or not generate excitement for the final movie in the trilogy. If The Last Jedi gave a dud answer to most or all of these questions, the ones raised in The Force Awakens, I mean, it would likely ruin both movies and Rey's overall story going into the final one. And though the first half of The Force Awakens did a great job of naturally and subtly inserting Rey into the story, of making it feel like her journey was just beginning, I mean, the Force flashback scene had basically told us she was just a misplaced or hidden Force-sensitive girl who likely had a destiny with Luke Skywalker for some reason. The back half of the film, however, and the things she does in it, makes us wonder if there is much more to the story than meets the eye. When she mind tricks a stormtrooper, for example, it leaves us immediately asking ourselves not only how did she even know how to try and do that, but how was she successful at it? It implies there is maybe a secret history to her, that she had quite possibly been trained before, and if so, by who. That one scene really ups our expectations of who or what Rey is. She goes from someone who is more or less a blank slate just entering the story, to perhaps someone rediscovering her place. And the really odd part about that scene is it wasn't even needed. She didn't need to essentially break herself out when we could have just had Finn, Han, and Chewie rescue her from the chair instead of them finding her roaming the station. When and how they found her actually changes nothing story-wise. It only makes her look like less of a damsel in distress, which is probably exactly why it was done. They wanted her to at least partially rescue herself. Though let's not forget Leia was straight up rescued by Han, Luke, and Chewie in A New Hope, and I don't think anyone would ever call her a damsel in distress. Then of course we have the duel with Kylo Ren at the end of the movie where she defeats him, and if instead, say, Luke Skywalker had shown up, had emerged from exile to save her in that moment, not only would Luke have had a truly spectacular scene that probably would have gotten everyone in the theater to stand up and cheer, but it fully makes Rey a part of this story, because not only were the Force ghosts sending her to Luke, but apparently Luke was looking for her too. Anyway, getting back to it, the real problem with Rey defeating Kylo at the end of The Force Awakens the way she did, by essentially just closing her eyes and letting the Force in, is that it opened up a whole can of worms for the overall story. Not only has Rey already defeated one of our main antagonists, which immediately makes him feel less intimidating, which granted might be what they've wanted to do with Kylo Ren, but Rey herself has now been elevated to a really high level after just one movie, and the curiosity level is notched all the way up if she can already defeat what essentially amounts to an apprentice Sith. Because now not only can she use a mind trick apparently, which implied training of some sort, but she seems to have skill with a lightsaber, which also implies more training, and she knows how to truly let the Force flow through her in a way that we've never even seen out of the greatest of Jedi Masters, which either implies a great deal of training, which makes no sense given her age and how long she was on Jakku, or she is something beyond anything we've ever seen before. And so we go from, at the start of the movie, being interested in her as a character and just wanting to go with her on this adventure and learning with her along the way as she finds her place in the story, to really needing or even demanding to know more about what she is or where she came from or why she's so powerful. People weren't interested in Rey, the character, after The Force Awakens. They weren't interested in who she was as a person. They were interested in what she was and knowing more about where she came from and what could explain her. And people not only wanted to make sense of her, but also of the previous parts of the story she now calls into question, like what happened to the need for extensive training, or the fact that the path to the dark side has always been thought of as the quick and easy path. Because I don't think there's a quicker or easier path than just closing your eyes and letting the Force in, especially since apparently she's never been trained and had thought the Force and the Jedi were a myth like 2 days ago. The real problem with Rey is she is a complete enigma after The Force Awakens that sticks out like a sore thumb in contrast to the rest of the entire story. She's already apparently more powerful than anything we've seen before. Again, that ability to close your eyes and just let the Force in is pretty crazy. And we, for the sake of continuity, are going to demand good answers to explain that. And thus, a huge burden was placed upon the next movie to give satisfying answers that we needed to have for this all to make sense. Yet in that next movie, as we now know, that wouldn't exactly happen. In The Last Jedi, Rey completely takes over the story, yet at the same time, we're told within the story itself that she has no place in it. The only explanation for her power and the ability to use it is one line from Snoke where he says that darkness rises and light to meet it. That's it. That's literally the only sort of explanation we get as to why she has the power she does and why, I guess, she can use it so well. Furthermore, Rian Johnson, writer and director of Episode 8, explained his decision to make Rey's parents nobody by saying that it would be the hardest thing for her to hear in that moment, which is odd considering I'm not sure she was ever under the assumption that she was actually quote-unquote somebody, which throws into question why that would be so hard to hear. In fact, it's Rey herself that says, when asked by Kylo Ren, that they were nobody, and when Kylo goes on to say they sold her for drinking money and are deadbeats, Rey does nothing to refute that, implying she's known this all along. Earlier in the movie, she even tells Luke that she needs someone to show her what her place is in all of this. And to me, that tells us that she's likely unsure why she's even doing this, why she's even here. She's found herself caught up in something and doesn't know what her place is, or even if she has one. I mean, one might think learning she's nobody would actually be the easiest thing to hear in that moment, since it frees her from any sort of obligation or responsibility to do anything about all this. And it'd be interesting if the next movie played on this idea, that Rey has no personal stake in this story, and maybe eventually will fight anyway though. But that of course won't happen, because why would we ever imply Rey might not want to be a hero just for the sake of being a hero? Anyway, going back to The Force Awakens for a moment now, her knowing all along who her parents were and that they were dead makes her stance of steadfastly refusing to leave Jakku in that movie a rather odd one. Sure, maybe she was lying to herself or had repressed the memories, but if that was the case, the movie really should have given us, the audience, clues indicating that possibility. In fact, knowing the truth that she's denying herself might actually make her more sympathetic to us, and we'd be dreading having to watch her world crash down around her when she again realizes the truth. Instead, we're even given a scene in The Force Awakens where someone is leaving her behind, giving us the impression that, yes, someone might indeed be coming back for her. Thus, we can understand her reluctance to leave. But after the fact, or after The Last Jedi, it now feels like we've been intentionally or purposely misled or fooled just so that we'd be surprised to learn Rey is nobody, even though she herself already knew that and wasn't surprised. Because again, she was the one who actually said it. And yes, there's every chance in Episode 9 we'll learn that there was more to the story, that maybe Kylo Ren planted false memories in her mind, or that even though her parents were nobody, her grandparents were somebody special. But here's a problem with that. After 2 movies now, we're still focused on where Rey comes from, or who she was, and not where she's going and who she'll become. It's hard to feel like we're going on a journey of discovery with her when, turns out, there were things she knew about herself that we didn't know, but we're led to believe she didn't know either, if that even makes sense. There's also the fact that Rey's biggest and really only failure in The Last Jedi is not bringing Ben Solo back to the light. And sure, I can buy that maybe the two are kindred spirits somehow, or that there is some mysterious bond between them. But come on, would you really essentially turn yourself in to try and save a guy you met a few days ago, one who had murdered his father right in front of you? I mean, it's just so hard to figure out this character and what her motivations are, because here we have this girl who knows her parents were nobody, who thought the Jedi and the Force were a myth, and she's having the legendary Luke Skywalker tell her that the Jedi need to end, that they're part of the problem. But she's like, no, you're wrong, Luke Skywalker. They need to keep going even though I had zero idea what the Force truly was until you gave me a couple lessons yesterday. And this guy Kylo Ren I met a couple days before, well, yeah, he murdered his father and tried to kill my best friend Finn, and he also mentally tortured me, but he needs to be saved above all else because it's important for reasons, balance or something. To sum up the main problem with Rey in The Last Jedi, after The Force Awakens had done a pretty good job with the character overall, making this feel like her adventure, is she's now going where the story needs her to go, doing the things it needs her to do. But I have no idea why she is doing these things. I have no idea what she wants outside of finding her place or belonging, and in order for this story to work, I have to buy into the fact that she would go to Kylo Ren right into the heart of the enemy and try to save him. I mean, had she really thought it all the way through? Did she think Kylo Ren would take her hand and the two would run off into the sunset together? And though a little off topic, maybe the worst thing Luke does in this movie is let Rey go to him. I mean, wow, he just tells her, this isn't going to go the way you think, and then sits back and lets her go to what should be her death. Or maybe worse yet, that she'll fall to the dark side and add to the problem. Now you've got Snoke, Kylo Ren, and the invincible Rey. Why not tell her that Snoke is most likely either going to kill you or turn you to the dark side? Not to mention, here was this girl who desperately wanted to save Ben, his nephew, so desperately wanting to bring him back to the light, and instead of helping her or finally offering to train her, he just lets her run off to get killed. Is Luke Skywalker really so far gone that he's going to sit back and do nothing as she flies off to her death? Anyway, I'm not even going to get into some of the other issues I have with Rey in this movie. Her continued proficiency with the Force, though, is chief among them. The real problem with Rey is a sense of disconnect with the character and her actions as the story goes on. I don't really care what happens to her since I don't even know what she wants anyway. Not to mention, there's little fear of her failing or being defeated, since those outside of the movie seem to be reluctant to imply she could be weak or flawed in some capacity. I again point to Rey saving herself from the torture chair in The Force Awakens, just for the sake of partially escaping herself. The other big issue is that she was shrouded in mystery for almost 2 full movies, yet turns out there was never really a mystery. Or so we've now been told, though expect that to change in the next movie, and for us to get a 3rd movie exploring where Rey comes from instead of where she's going. Rey knew all along who she was and what had happened to her parents according to The Last Jedi. Even though, for some crazy reason, when she goes into the dark side cave, she asks the mirror to show her who her parents are, despite knowing who they were. That was just another way this movie tries to build up a non-existent mystery so that our expectations can be further subverted. And so how do they now, or could they have, fixed these issues with the character in The Rise of Skywalker? Well, in theory, it's actually kind of easy. You turn some of the problems people have with the character into problems for the character itself. What do I mean by that? Well, since we don't know what motivates Rey, we make it so that Rey herself lacks motivation to do anything or to continue this fight she's found herself a part of. Start the movie out with Rey having given up and run away herself, have her doubting herself because she doesn't feel like this is truly her fight. Furthermore, you also make her afraid of her ever-growing power. You make it something she is struggling to control, which also ties into why she ran away perhaps. Start the movie with Finn and Poe hunting for Rey, and alluding to something she did, something bad that caused her to become afraid of herself. Maybe she lost control, started to use the dark side, and she hurt some people. Maybe she was too sure of herself and her ability, and tried to use the Force and it ended up backfiring and some people died. Have her have made a decision or a mistake off screen, or even at the start of the movie, which causes her to doubt herself. Doing something that turns the arguments against her on their head, or contradicts them, is the best way to try and improve the character and make people care about her. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. If you enjoyed this video, let me know and I'll make more like it for other characters. But now it's your turn to tell me what you think about Rey, what you like about her, what you don't, and how you think she could be improved in the final movie, or if she's fine as is. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.